Viewer discretion advised. This content contains disturbing real-life accounts involving attempted abduction, paranormal experiences, and dangerous encounters. This video may be unsuitable for viewers under 18 and those sensitive to fear-inducing content. If you are under 18 or easily frightened, please do not watch. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The Man with the Knife. There are moments in life that split your existence into two clean halves: the person you were before and the person you became after. For me, that moment didn't happen during some dramatic life milestone. It didn't happen at graduation or at the birth of a sibling or even at a funeral. It happened on a Tuesday in late May, during what was supposed to be the most forgettable kind of day a 12-year-old could possibly have, a 7th grade field trip. I want you to really sit with that for a second. A field trip. The kind of day where your biggest concern is supposed to be whether you packed enough snacks in your lunch bag or whether your best friend is going to be in your chaperone group. The kind of day that's supposed to end with a bus ride home. Sunburned shoulders and a crumpled permission slip still stuffed in your backpack. The kind of day that should mean absolutely nothing, except it meant everything, because it almost meant the end of everything. I grew up in a small mountain town in eastern Tennessee. When I say small, I mean the kind of small where everybody knows your name, your parents' names, your grandparents' names, and probably the name of your dog. The roads curl around hillsides like sleeping snakes. The forests press in on every side. It's beautiful in that haunting, suffocating way that only people who've grown up somewhere remote can truly understand. You love it and you feel trapped by it at the same time. Our schools serve kids from all the surrounding mountain communities, and every spring the 7th grade look forward to one thing above all others: the field trip to the aquarium. It was about 45 minutes away, and for kids who'd spent their whole lives surrounded by trees and elevation, the idea of staring into massive tanks full of ocean creatures felt genuinely exotic, like glimpsing another world. The aquarium was a big facility, multiple floors, winding passageways, observation tunnels that put you right inside the tanks. When you're 12 and you've mostly seen catfish and creek crawdads, walking under a ceiling of circling sharks feels pretty close to magic. My best friend at the time was a kid named Cole. Cole and I had been inseparable since 3rd grade. We had the kind of friendship where you don't even have to explain what you're thinking. You just look at each other and already know. We were the kind of kids who were always halfway into trouble, not because we were bad kids, but because we were curious ones. There's a difference, even if the adults in your life don't always recognize it. Our chaperone for the day was our science teacher, Mr. Hargrove. Mr. Hargrove was the kind of teacher who students either loved or were completely baffled by. He wasn't strict. He wasn't particularly organized. He showed up on that field trip in cargo shorts and worn-out sneakers, and his version of supervision was mostly just existing in the same general zip code as his students. The other chaperones, the room parents, and the assistant teachers were hovering over their groups like Secret Service agents. Mr. Hargrove was drinking a coffee and reading the exhibit plaques with genuine personal interest. I want to be clear. In the long run, his laid-back approach almost got Cole and me killed. We hadn't been in the building 20 minutes before. Cole leaned over to me and said, "This line is moving like a funeral. Come on." And just like that, the two of us peeled away from the group and moved ahead into the aquarium on our own. It was genuinely that easy. Nobody called after us. Nobody even looked up. The aquarium was closed to the general public that day. It was a school booking, so our classes essentially had the whole place to themselves. That meant the winding observation corridors, which would normally be packed shoulder to shoulder with tourists, were completely empty except for our group. And since Cole and I had broken ahead, they were empty for us too. We moved through the passageways in that deep blue-tinted darkness that aquariums always have. The kind of light that feels like being underwater yourself. Tank after tank glowed on either side of us. We made stupid jokes about the fish, pointed at the ones we recognized from movies, argued about which ones could actually hurt you. It felt like we owned the place. We were in one of the tropical rooms, walls lined with tanks full of vivid, darting fish in colors that looked almost painted. When we heard it, "Hey." One word, but the tone of it stopped me cold. This wasn't a friendly hey. It wasn't a teacher calling out a student's name. It was assertive and flat, and had a kind of authority to it that made my stomach drop. Before my brain had even processed why, I turned around. There was a man standing about 15 feet away from us. He looked to be somewhere in his mid to late 30s. He was wearing cargo shorts. I remember this specifically because Mr. Hargrove was also wearing cargo shorts that day. And for a split second, my confused brain tried to connect the two men. And a dark green t-shirt. He wasn't wearing any kind of employee badge or lanyard that I could see. He wasn't holding a radio. He had nothing in his hands at all. He asked us if we were part of the school group. I was about to say no. I don't know exactly what instinct drove that response. Maybe some self-preserving sense that it would be better to claim we were there with our parents. But I never got the chance. Cole, completely straightforwardly, said yes. The man told us to come with him. Right now. Everything that happened next was a masterclass in how predators exploit the social programming of children. We had been told our whole lives to listen to adults, to not make scenes, to assume that grown-ups in positions of authority knew what they were doing. So when this man started leading us through a side door and into a narrow hallway that was clearly not part of the public exhibition area, neither of us stopped walking. We assumed we were in trouble. We assumed he was staff. We assumed there was a rational explanation. The hallway was dim and smelled like cleaning supplies and rubber. We passed a set of bathrooms, then a door marked "Employees Only." Then a series of exit signs hanging from the ceiling at intervals. The man walked in front of us with a pace that was deliberate, not rushing, not slow. The kind of pace that says, I know exactly where I'm going and I expect you to follow. We came to a heavy door at the end of the corridor. He pushed it open and daylight hit us. We were outside, not at the front of the building, at the back, near what looked like a service entrance. The woods came right up to the edge of the pavement back there. No tourists, no staff, just us, this man, and the tree line. I finally asked him where we were going. He said he needed to drive us around to the front entrance so we could be properly readmitted with our group. It made no sense. Logistically, it made no sense. The front entrance was maybe 100 yards away on foot. But Cole and I were two 12-year-olds who thought we were on the verge of getting expelled. And when a man who presents himself as an authority figure tells you something with enough confidence, your brain reaches for the interpretation that makes the most sense in the context you've been raised in. And in the context we'd been raised in, adults didn't lie to you in broad daylight at a school field trip. We got in his car. I cannot stress enough how ordinary that moment felt. We opened the back doors. We sat down. We buckled our seatbelts because he told us to. The car was clean. There was a fast food bag on the floor of the passenger seat. There was an air freshener hanging from the mirror. Normal. Everything about the surface of this situation felt normal. He pulled out of the back parking lot and turned onto the street, and then he turned left. Cole and I both said it at the same time. Where are you going? The aquarium was to the right. Everything we'd come from was to the right. He didn't answer. 5 seconds of silence. maybe less. Then we heard the locks click down on both back doors. And then he said something. I'm not going to quote it exactly because even now it turns my stomach. But the message was simple. If either of us made any kind of move, he would kill us. He reached into his glove box and produced a knife, long bladed. He held it up briefly, just long enough for us to see it, and then he set it down on the passenger seat in front of him. Cole and I went silent. I have never in my life felt so completely alone. We were in a moving car, locked in, with a man holding a knife, driving us uphill through a stretch of wooded residential road that I didn't recognize. The houses thinned out. The trees thickened. The road got narrower. I kept looking at Cole's face and he kept looking at mine. And there were no words for what was passing between us. Just pure animal fear and the desperate, grinding effort to think. He couldn't talk to me without the man hearing. I couldn't talk to him. The man kept checking his rearview mirror, catching our eyes every few seconds, making sure we understood the situation. Eventually, he pulled over. We were on a stretch of road that felt like the middle of nowhere. No houses visible, no other traffic, just the tree line crowding in on both sides, and the silence of the mountains. He got out of the car with the knife in his hand. Then he came around to my door, opened it, and told me to get out. And then he told me to tell Cole that if Cole wanted me to stay alive, he better still be in that car when we got back. I can't describe the feeling that went through me when I heard that. It was like the ground disappeared, like everything solid in the world just ceased to exist. And there was nothing holding me up except the sheer momentum of still being alive. He started walking me toward the woods. I turned my head one last time and looked at Cole through the car window. Cole had already slid across the back seat to my door, the one the man had just opened and left unlocked. The moment Cole looked ready, I screamed. Cole was already moving. I spun and ran. The man grabbed for me and missed. I sprinted past him downhill in the direction we'd come. Cole had hit the ground running a half second behind me and was already pulling ahead, his sneakers slapping the asphalt. Both of us running with the kind of complete body commitment that you only access when your brain genuinely believes your life depends on it. The man chased us. He chased us on foot down that road. And I don't know how close he got. But I remember the sound, a sharp, metallic clatter on the asphalt ahead of me. And I realized he had thrown the knife. He had thrown the knife at me. It hit the road a few feet in front of my path and skidded off into the gravel on the shoulder. I didn't stop. We ran until we couldn't hear anything behind us anymore, until the road widened and a familiar intersection appeared, and the shape of the aquarium came back into view. We were breathing so hard we couldn't speak. We were shaking. Cole had a small scrape on his palm from something. I still don't know what. We stood there for a moment, just the two of us, chests heaving, looking at each other in the ordinary afternoon sunlight. We found our way back inside. Mr. Hargrove hadn't noticed we were gone. The group was moving through the jellyfish exhibit. We slipped back in like ghosts. Cole and I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not that day. Not for a long time. The logic of it, the 12-year-old logic, was that telling would mean admitting we'd snuck away, which would mean getting in trouble, and the man was gone and we were alive. So what was the point? We were kids. We were scared. We convinced ourselves that staying quiet was the rational choice. As we got older, we stopped being able to convince ourselves of that. Quite as easily, I think about that man sometimes. I think about the knife. I think about how easily it could have ended differently. and how many variables had to break exactly right for us to be running instead of something else entirely. I don't like to think about it for too long. The third figure in the window. If the aquarium trip was the moment that taught me what human beings are capable of, then the ghost tour in 8th grade was the moment that made me question what else might be out there, in the spaces between what we can explain and what we simply have to accept. Let me set the scene. 8th grade, late October. Our class of about 90 students had spent 3 days in and around the Washington, D.C. area for our annual history trip. Monuments, museums, the full rotation of every landmark your history teacher has been referencing since you were 8 years old. It was a good trip. Exhausting, but good. By the third day, most of us had the specific, tired but wired energy of kids who haven't been sleeping properly, because hotel rooms with your friends are not exactly conducive to rest. On the final evening, our teachers surprised us with something that wasn't on the original itinerary, a colonial ghost tour. Now, I want to be precise about this because the details matter. This wasn't the cheesy kind of ghost tour where an actor in a cape waves a lantern and reads ghost stories off a laminated card. This was a legitimate historical walking tour, organized, thoughtful, led by knowledgeable guides that happened to focus on the darker and more unexplained elements of the colonial history in the area. We were in a region near some of the oldest surviving structures in the mid-Atlantic, preserved colonial homes, old churchyards, the kind of neighborhood where the past doesn't feel entirely past. We were divided into groups of about 10 students each, paired with a guide. Our guide was a woman in her 50s who clearly knew the history inside and out. She had the kind of voice that commanded attention without raising itself. She told us up front, "Don't expect much. These tours aren't about scaring you. They're about history. If something unusual shows up in a photograph, that's interesting. But more likely than not, we'd just be walking and listening and learning. I'm not someone who goes looking for the supernatural. I grew up in a religious household, which meant the topic of ghosts and spirits was complicated, sometimes dismissed entirely, sometimes treated with a kind of fearful seriousness. Either way, it made me cautious. I didn't want to believe in ghosts because I wasn't sure I was equipped to handle actually encountering one. So I kept my camera in my pocket for most of the tour and focused on the histories. We moved through the neighborhood in the evening dark, past iron fences and bare-limbed trees, past restored homes with period-accurate window frames, past small cemetery plots with headstones worn smooth by weather and time. The guide narrated as we walked, and the histories she shared were genuinely absorbing. These weren't horror stories, they were human stories. People who'd lived and struggled and died in these same spaces 250 years ago. That part of it I found affecting in a way I hadn't expected. One of my close friends on that trip was a girl named Audrey. Audrey was quiet and thoughtful and was not among the kids who'd been snapping photographs every 30 seconds, hoping to catch an orb. She had her camera, a small digital point and shoot, but she used it rarely, deliberately. She was more interested in listening than in documenting. We came to a stop in front of a narrow 2-story home set slightly back from the street. It was one of the older structures in the neighborhood, preserved rather than restored, which meant it had a genuine weathered quality, not the overly polished look of a renovation. The windows on both floors had a faint bluish cast from inside that I found difficult to explain, given that the house was supposedly unoccupied and had been for some time. Our guide began to tell us about the house. The home had originally belonged to a merchant in the late colonial period, a man of some local standing and considerable personal pride. He had married a woman known for her beauty and warmth, and by all historical accounts the two were deeply devoted to each other. When his wife became pregnant with their first child, The man's happiness was described in letters and journals of the period as almost overwhelming, the kind of joy that makes a person generous and expansive. The wife died in childbirth. The baby girl survived. The man's grief curdled over time into something that went looking for a target. The daughter, by accounts a plain-looking child, quiet and diligent, became the object of her father's resentment. He kept her in the house, away from society. He told her she was homely. He told her she would never find a husband. He had her trained in needlework and weaving because, as he reportedly told her hands were the only part of her worth anything. The guide said all of this in a measured, factual tone. No embellishment. No dramatic pauses. Just the history. I felt sick listening to it. The specific cruelty of it, the way a man had taken his grief and aimed it directly at the one person who had done nothing wrong, felt unbearably familiar in a human way. This wasn't a ghost story. This was just a true story about what people do to each other. We moved on to the next stop. Audrey stopped walking. I noticed because I'd been beside her most of the evening and I felt her go still before I saw why. She was looking down at the small screen on the back of her camera. Her face had changed. I know Audrey. I'd known her since 5th grade. She does not rattle easily. And her face, right then, was rattled. I stepped back toward her and looked at the screen. She had taken a photograph of the house as we'd stood in front of it. Just one photograph, framed on the upper floors. There was a soft source of ambient light in the image. I don't know where it came from. Maybe a street lamp behind us, maybe something else. And in the upper right window of the 2nd floor, there was something that did not belong. 3 figures. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know the arguments about lens flare and pareidolia and the tendency of the human brain to construct faces from ambiguous visual information. I'm aware of all of that, and I've thought about all of that in the years since. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm just telling you what I saw. On the right side of the window, a shape that read unmistakably as a woman. Her outline was translucent. You could see the faint geometry of the window frame through her. But the shape of a female figure was clear, standing, facing outward. Behind her, taller, a figure that read as a man. He was less defined but present, an outline, a mass, something upright and human-shaped standing behind the woman and to the side. And then at the far edge of the frame, partially obscured but present, a third figure, also feminine in shape, but different. Her outline was darker than the other woman's, less translucent, more opaque in a way that made her harder to see rather than easier. She was there. Whatever was generating these images in the photograph, she was definitely there. Audrey and I stood there in the middle of the path, the rest of the group moving ahead of us, and we couldn't stop looking at the screen. I thought, the first woman and the man, the wife and the father. That interpretation came immediately. The story we'd just been told. The 2 people who'd lived and died in that house. Their shapes in the window. But the third figure. I raised my hand and called for the guide to wait. I asked her, was there anyone else who had lived in that house with the family? The guide looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or something close to it. She said yes. During the period of their residence, the family had kept an enslaved black woman in the household. The enslaved woman had lived and died in that house, too. Her story was not often discussed in historical accounts of the property. There are things that happen in your life that you carry with you not because they're frightening, but because they feel weighted with something too large for you to fully process. That photograph is one of those things for me. I don't know what Audrey captured that night. I don't know what those shapes were or weren't, but I know that the third figure was there in the image, and I know that when I asked about her, the guide confirmed that there had been a third person, someone whose life in that house was real and documented and largely forgotten. I think about her sometimes. Audrey still has that photograph. The man on the top floor. Some stories, when you tell them out loud, sound like the setup to a horror movie. You say the words and you can see on the listener's face the moment they start wondering if you're exaggerating. I understand that reaction. I have it myself sometimes, looking back, because the facts of what happened during my senior year field trip sound so specifically like the plot of something that it's hard to believe it was just a Wednesday afternoon in our lives. But it was. It was real, and it happened, and I haven't fully stopped thinking about it since. Our forensics teacher, I'll call him Mr. Dixon, wasn't a conventional educator. He was the kind of teacher who attracted students who were equally unconventional. His class was one of the most genuinely interesting courses offered at our school. Actual forensic science, criminal procedure, evidence analysis. Not the watered-down version. Mr. Dixon had connections from a previous career that he was never entirely clear about. And those connections seemed to give him access to things that a regular high school teacher would never have been able to arrange. Which is how, in the fall of our senior year, a group of about 20 students found ourselves on a bus heading out of town toward a site that Mr. Dixon described only as a building with significant forensic history. He was underselling it. The road that led to the building was the kind of road that makes you instinctively feel wrong. It was paved, barely, but the asphalt had cracked and heaved in so many places that grass and weeds had pushed through in long strips, blurring the line between road and field. It disappeared into a section of dense second-growth forest, and by the time the building came into view through the trees, every single person on that bus had gone quiet. It was enormous. 6, maybe 7 stories of raw concrete and rusted steel, standing in a cleared section of woods, like something that had been placed there in the middle of the night. There were no other structures within sight. There was no adjacent neighborhood, no obvious reason for anything that large to exist in that particular spot. The upper floors were clearly unfinished. The exterior concrete stopped midway up the building and gave way to bare structural steel and open air. Mr. Dixon explained as we climbed off the bus that the building's original intended purpose was still somewhat contested. Construction had apparently halted for reasons that were never formally documented. But the building's isolation, its size, and its distance from any residential population had made it, over the years, a well-known hub for illegal activity, primarily drug trafficking and related offenses. Multiple law enforcement operations had been conducted on the property. Evidence of habitation and criminal activity had been recovered from numerous floors. That was the forensic history he'd referenced. He led us inside. The ground floor was cavernous and dim, light filtering in through broken windows and a section of collapsed exterior wall. The smell was damp concrete and something more chemical underneath. Graffiti covered every surface, not the casual tagging of bored teenagers, but dense, layered, years-deep accumulation of images and text that gave the walls a kind of visual noise. Empty bottles, discarded clothing, the debris of occupation. Mr. Dixon gave us a tour of the lower floors with the confidence of someone who had been here before. He knew which doors were structurally sound. He knew which areas of flooring to avoid. He moved through the space as if he'd memorized it, and as he walked, he pointed out physical evidence of the building's history. particular markings, specific structural features, areas where investigators had recovered materials. It was genuinely educational in the most surreal possible context. He was also, it turned out, about as attentive a chaperone as Mr. Hargrove had been at the aquarium, which is to say, not particularly attentive at all. Students began drifting off to explore on their own within the first 30 minutes. A few kids peeled away to document graffiti on their phones. A couple of others started investigating a back corridor that Mr. Dixon had mentioned but not led us through. Nobody was stopped. Nobody was called back. My closest friend at that point in my life was a girl named Maya. Maya was sharp and fearless, and had a higher tolerance for terrible ideas than almost anyone I knew, which is why, when I told her I wanted to see the upper floors, she didn't hesitate. The building had at least 8 floors. From outside, we'd been able to see that the top 2 or 3 levels were unfinished. No windows, no exterior cladding, just open structural framework. But the stairwell was intact, at least for the lower levels, and I wanted to see how high we could get. We started climbing. The lower floors were heavily documented with graffiti and debris. It was clear these levels had seen consistent traffic over the years. As we went higher, something odd happened. The middle floors were cleaner, less tagging, less litter, as if fewer people had made it this far. But then, as we continued upward, the pattern reversed. The upper floors were messier than the middle ones. More graffiti, more recent markings, more signs of active use. Someone had been up here, and not that long ago. We reached what seemed to be the second highest accessible floor. The floor here was raw wood subflooring, most of it visibly deteriorating. Large sections had rotted through entirely, leaving gaps that dropped straight down to the floor below. The ceiling above us was similarly compromised. Raw structural material, holes, exposed framing. Light came through from every direction in thin, shifting columns. The staircase to the final floor had been completely removed. Not collapsed, removed. The structural elements that would have supported a staircase were there, but the stairs themselves were gone. We were as high as we were going to get via the stairs. I was scanning the ceiling for any sign of another access point when Maya grabbed my arm. She pointed up. There was a hole in the ceiling directly above us, about the size of a large manhole cover, and through it, an arm was slowly extending downward into the space. Just an arm. The sleeve was dark, black or close to it, and it extended past the cuff so that the only skin visible was the hand at the end of it. The arm was positioned at an angle that suggested the person above was lying flat on their stomach beside the hole, reaching down. The hand was open, relaxed, not holding anything, and from somewhere above us we could hear a sound. It was a clicking noise, rhythmic, soft, repetitive, the kind of sound you'd make with your tongue against the roof of your mouth to call an animal, patient and steady. I laughed a little. I'm not proud of that, but I did. The absurdity of the situation, the arm, the clicking, the general horror movie geometry of it, struck me as almost funny for about 4 seconds. Maya did not laugh. She was looking up at the arm with an expression that made my own amusement dry up quickly. I called out to whoever was up there, asked how to get up to that level. No answer, just the clicking. Continuing. The arm waved us upward, slowly. "Come up here," the gesture said. "Come on up." Maya said we should go back down. I was about to agree with her when something changed. The arm withdrew. A single sound, the fast scrape of a shoe on wood. One quick movement like a person getting up rapidly from a prone position. And then silence, the kind of silence that is worse than sound because you can't track it. We couldn't see anything through the hole above us. Whoever was up there was up and moving, and we had no idea where. I put my hand on Maya's back and we started moving toward the stairwell. We were almost to the corridor entrance when a crash came from the far side of the room. We turned. A man was standing against the far wall. He had clearly just come through one of the holes in the floor, not the ceiling, a floor hole, which meant he'd either dropped from somewhere above or simply appeared from somewhere we hadn't been watching. He was facing the wall, just standing there, facing the wall for a moment that lasted too long, and then he turned his head to look at us. Not his body, just his head. I don't want to overstate this, but there was something about him that registered as wrong in a way that bypassed normal threat assessment. It wasn't the way he was dressed, though he wasn't dressed like an urban explorer, or a homeless person seeking shelter, or anyone in a recognizable category. It was something in the way he moved, or rather in the way he decided not to move yet, that made every hair on my body stand up. He looked at us across that empty, deteriorating room, and neither Maya nor I said anything. I said quietly, "Go." We ran, down the stairs, one flight at a time, neither of us looking back. On the first look back I took, maybe 3 or 4 floors down, I looked up through the open center of the stairwell and saw him. He was looking down at us. He was closer than he should have been for how recently we'd started running. He was following us. I told Maya to keep moving. We didn't stop. We didn't slow down. We took every flight as fast as we could without losing footing on the debris-covered stairs. I looked up again 2 floors later, and he was still there, still descending, still gaining. We hit the ground floor at a run and burst out through the entrance we'd come in through, and the sunlight was there and Mr. Dixon was there, with the rest of the group standing about 20 yards from the front of the building. I looked back up. I didn't see him. I stood there for a second with my hands on my knees, breathing hard. Maya was already at my side. When I looked at her face, I stopped feeling any urge to make a joke about what had just happened. She was genuinely shaken in a way I'd never seen from her before. Mr. Dixon asked us where we'd been. We told him the truth. He listened to the whole account with a very still expression on his face. Then he said quietly that we needed to get everyone back to the bus right now. He gathered the group and did 3 head counts before he seemed satisfied. On the way back to the bus, he didn't say much. But as we were loading up, he turned to me and said, with a seriousness I won't forget, "That building has had active incidents as recently as 18 months ago." I should have made that clearer. I didn't ask him what active incidents meant. I didn't want to know. The bus ride back was quieter than the ride out. Maya sat beside me and neither of us talked about it. We didn't talk about it for weeks. When we finally did, we didn't so much process it as we just confirmed the facts to each other. Yes, the arm. Yes, the clicking. Yes, the man on the far wall, turning just his head. Yes, the way he was still coming down the stairs when we cleared the last flight. Some things aren't resolved by talking. They just have to be carried. What we carry home. There's a particular quality that these 3 stories share. Something I've only been able to name properly in the years since they happened. Each of them started with permission. That's the part that stays with me. Every single one of these situations began because I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. A school field trip, a supervised excursion, an educational activity organized by teachers and sanctioned by parents and administrators. The architecture of safety was in place. The systems were functioning. And then, within those systems, things went terribly wrong in ways that none of those systems were equipped to catch. The man at the aquarium didn't wait outside the fence. He came inside. He walked the same hallways our teachers were walking. He used the language of authority. "Come with me. I'll take care of this. Everything is fine." Because he understood that two 12-year-olds who thought they were in trouble would respond to that language before they'd respond to their own instincts, telling them something was wrong. I've thought about that a lot over the years. The way Cole and I walked right past every red flag, because the surface of the situation was structured to look like something safe. The man didn't look like a movie villain. He looked like a slightly disheveled adult in cargo shorts. He used an ordinary voice. He said ordinary things. He counted on the fact that we had been raised to be polite, to be cooperative, to not make a scene. He was right to count on it, and it almost killed us. The ghost tour is a different kind of story. Different because the entity of concern, if that's what it was, didn't want to harm us. Or if it did, it didn't act on it. What the ghost tour gave me wasn't fear exactly. It was something more like vertigo. The photograph Audrey took that night did something to the way I understood the world. It opened a question that I haven't been able to fully close. What else is there in the spaces that official history doesn't bother to document? The story of the third figure, the woman whose life in that house was real and verifiable and largely unacknowledged, felt like a rebuke to the comfortable idea that the past is over. Some things don't conclude just because we stop paying attention to them. The building in the woods is the one that I'm least able to make sense of. The man with the arm in the ceiling hole, I've constructed explanations. Urban explorers, squatters, someone with mental illness who'd found shelter in an abandoned structure. These are all plausible. They don't entirely account for the way he moved or the way he looked at us across that room, but they're plausible. What I keep coming back to is not the man himself, but the building. The fact that Mr. Dixon described active incidents as recently as 18 months ago. The fact that there were signs of recent occupation on the upper floors that had been stripped of stairs. The fact that whoever was up there had been waiting, patiently in a position where they could observe the floor below through a hole, and had been there long enough to choose to signal us rather than simply hide. People who are hiding don't signal. They go still and they wait for you to leave. This person was not hiding. What I know for certain about all three of these experiences is this. The world is not as supervised as it looks. The systems we build to keep children safe depend entirely on the attention of the adults running those systems, and attention is a finite resource that gets depleted and redirected. Mr. Hargrove didn't see us leave the aquarium because he was absorbed in exhibit plaques. Mr. Dixon didn't notice students drifting to the upper floors because he was engaged with the group he could see. The chaperones on the ghost tour were managing a group of 90 overtired 8th graders across a dark neighborhood and could not be everywhere at once. None of these adults were villains. They were just human, which means their attention had limits. The spaces left by those limits, that's where these stories live. I've told these accounts to very few people over the years. Cole, who lived the first one with me and doesn't need to be told. Audrey, who took the photograph and understands what we saw in it. Maya, who needs no convincing about the third floor of that building. The rest of the world, I've mostly kept it from. Not because I'm ashamed of any of it, but because there's a particular kind of loneliness in having an experience that reshapes your understanding of things, and then having to walk around in a world that hasn't had that experience. You learn to hold it quietly. You learn to carry it without letting it change the way you move through ordinary days. But ordinary days aren't the same as they were before. Nothing about ordinary days ever quite is. If you've made it to the end of this, I want to say one thing directly. Trust your instincts. Not in the vague, motivational poster sense of that phrase, but in the very specific, physical, immediate sense. When something feels wrong, that feeling is data. It is your nervous system processing information that your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. Cole and I felt something wrong when that man spoke to us in the aquarium. We ignored it because we'd been trained to defer to adults who acted with authority. We nearly paid for that with our lives. If something feels wrong, name it. Say it out loud. Run if you have to. Running saved us. These are true accounts. Some details have been adjusted to protect the privacy of the people involved. The experiences themselves are real, and I carry them with me every day. Stay safe out there.